if you benchmark it. If you don't.
Right, if you actually do everything properly and get it vetted and stuff, then you get 5%. So.
Honestly, I've heard that before from all of the kind of the code council items, that you'll have order of magnitude changes one cycle, and then the next one or two might just be like 30% one year, and then it's like 5.
This is only 5% total. Like it's never, you won't get the 30%.
Well, I guess I've heard that some years it's a bigger jump,
Oh,
and then some years it's more of a tweak.
Oh, I see what you
It's like order of magnitude.
Yeah,
Like
depending.
09 to 12,
Was a bigger jump.
the building codes was huge.
Right.
But 12 to 15
Incremental.
was smaller. It was some, more surgical upgrades and tweaks.
Right, which is why older, I think, looked initially at the 30% up, because they exceeded whatever the new code was, but then they're still tweaking, because they're tweaking, trying to make their process easier.
Okay, maybe we should just wait until Boulder gets their new code sorted out and then just copy them.
Yeah, well, so I've been looking, I was telling Martin, I read through all those, trying to find their budget numbers, and it's just varied, but it's interesting. One of the things we noted was the biggest thing they did with commercial was like ready and so on buildings. It's
okay.
requiring for certain kinds of commercial, hotel, or office.
Okay.
And that's their prescriptive route, and then they kind of, everything else is still the same as it was with 2012, with their last iteration, which was 20%.
Okay.
So not a lot has changed. They just added, they've tried to streamline it because it was costing them so much money to try to enforce it.
Okay.
And review it.
So that was for the ECC.
For IECC. They don't use IG. Really.
Hello.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Doing well, how are you? Welcome to our massive group.
Alright.
So far.
I was telling Sharon before that I feel bad for the folks who show up at 5:30 because I looked at the video trying to find where we ended last month, and I'm like, why are we just sitting there for 15 minutes?
Yeah, just waiting, waiting.
What are we doing?
Just sitting, no chatting.
So I appreciate you guys for being here at 5:30. Try and honor your time. We can try and get started, get through some of the initial stuff, maybe catch folks up if they want. Be respectful of your time.
Yeah. I know you have to leave a little early. So
I gotta leave at 6:45 regardless.
Yeah.
Y'all can stay. And I'll set the door to lock.
Yeah,
Just
give
hang
us
out.
a secure.
Network.
Come back and turn the alarm on. But yeah, it's really up to you. Go.
Let's do it.
Oh, yeah, I sent you.
It's also Easter weekend, so I wouldn't be too surprised if attendance is lower because of that. Hey Martin, did I volunteer to help out with Arbor Day?
You did not. You
Okay.
thought about it. You're
Cool.
gonna check your schedule. I had written down Mike and Caitlin's name.
Okay, good, because yeah, it'd be really hard for me to do that, so I had a sudden panic moment earlier today. I was like, wait a minute, I had volunteer.
Oh no,
for
the
that.
whole event is hinging on you. I didn't tell you that.
No!
So you guys got the emails from yesterday. So we had the agenda a couple of days ago, then
Mhm.
Sharon's memo and some supporting materials, and then SAU sent the updated PowerPoint. So Sharon has a PowerPoint to go over, summarizing some of the topics, the big picture topics and questions
Cool.
in her memo. And then also SAU, the PowerPoint that you had updated
Mhm.
is available also. So I don't know what might make sense to kind of do first, but they're all up here, and whoever wants to have the mouse can have it.
Should I go ahead and run through my slightly tweaked slides, just because there's probably not
Sure.
going to be a whole lot of commentary on that, and then if other people show up, I can't think your information would probably be more useful
Yeah.
or exciting.
Take it from you.
All right. It's really slow. All right, cool. How do I go back?
You can just
Oh,
right
cool,
click
okay.
and then
There you go. Used to having a keyboard, so. Yeah, so this will look pretty familiar. I think, I'm not sure if you saw the version I sent out earlier today.
I saw this version, right?
Yeah, so it's a tweaked version of
Tweaked.
the one I presented last time. So I'll just run through it. It's basically more or less the same, just now has pretty pictures. So.
Yeah, and the
um,
context, so I'm clear, is that you, do we know our date for presentation of this to the?
May
town board?
22nd, so I included that date with your
Okay.
agenda.
Yes,
It's also on your agenda.
perfect.
So the committee is currently scheduled to have their annual joint work session dinner on May 22nd at 5:30. And then during the presentation section of the board's agenda that night, it's usually in the first half hour or so of the agenda, will be the presentation item. And that will be when the group can officially make their presentation and request, the
Perfect.
two-prong request.
All right.
And how much time in their agenda do we anticipate having to
We
allocate
talked
to this?
last month, I think, about our typical is, 6 or 8 slides, kind of like this, and plan for maybe 10 minutes. And then depending on the board's level of questions or interest in pursuing or asking follow-up questions, it's usually, 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
Sometimes less, sometimes more. But we usually say single digits for slides and single digits for minutes of presentation, and then leave time for questions and dialogue.
Great.
Perfect.
Okay.
So these are describing the benefits, why care about building sustainability. It's more or less the same as last time. So the purpose of this presentation is to discuss a kind of immediate option for promoting more sustainable commercial buildings, which is what the Camp Pilot project is, as well as to request the board to consider looking at long-term options for promoting more sustainable buildings through code changes or ordinances. And these are a couple examples. So this is all the information for the pilot project. This is the wordiest slide at the moment, but I think it's all good information to have for reference. So it kind of describes both the commercial development review process and how this can be used, along with the kind of mid and post-construction side of things.
That really gets at the ask, right? The idea of starting something like this, call it a pilot and see how it works. Hi, Lisa.
Yeah, exactly.
But you recognize the jacket.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. I missed it. You're just far enough down that you can't see the logo.
Thank you, Lisa.
Hi.
So just running through kind of the revised slides. Mostly it's
Yeah, I liked them.
effectively the same. Oh, cool. Okay.
They're fine.
Awesome. Yeah, so these are kind of 4 categories that the document touches on. Energy efficiency, so this is talking about renewables, building to more stringent IECZ codes, looking at solar awnings and the DOE's tool. Water conservation, which is largely about water sense products, but then also looking at gray water use and things like that. Waste management, so composting, managing construction waste, and then using locally produced and renewable building materials as well. And then the community building slide, these are more things like electric vehicle charging stations, having more bike racks, looking at green roofs for energy and heat island reduction effects, spaces for community gardens, walkability, things like that. And then next steps, so both the short term, which is kind of this pilot, and then long term, looking at improving the code and ordinances. So that's it.
Yeah, I like the cleaner slides.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So they're appropriately readable.
Excellent. Apart from the one. But I think that's a good level to set for that one.
Not, that's not that critical, so
Great. Yeah, that's kind of what I figured.
everything in proportion,
So Lisa, trying to honor everybody's time for being here, we started a little out of sequence and waiting to see if there will be a couple of additional members show up, and we'll go over the start.
right? You saw someone else show up, right?
Yeah, I think I saw Michelle.
Yep.
So let's call it critical mass. So we skipped ahead to the item Essie had to just review while there wasn't,
I looked them
while we didn't
over.
have critical mass.
At the office, it's fine.
Cool.
And as you're describing this, so I agree that this is a good level of detail for a brief presentation of this length. And how will you describe the points, all points system to them?
I'm not going to go
during
into it
this.
in too much detail in this, just because I don't want to unnecessarily confuse them. But in this slide, it does briefly talk about sustainability points, so I'll elaborate and describe what that is and the fact that kind of each project has a certain number of points that are recommended associated with that based on the overall impact it has and the cost and level of effort to implement. And so that's kind of how we've broken up and differentiated between different types of projects. So I wasn't planning on going into much more detail than that, but yeah, certainly kept highlighting it that way.
That sounds good. I'm sure they would appreciate just a couple of, hearing by voice, a couple examples of things that earn points without going into the whole.
That it will be included
Right.
with the packet, so it'll need a.
Oh, they all have that in front of them?
Yeah,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, I was going to suggest after the last slide where you expect to stop, just in case they ask questions, you might you might put the score thing so that
Okay,
if
yeah.
we need to project it, we can.
Yeah, that's great.
You know,
You can just have it on screen, because it'll be part of the packet.
that's what I'm saying. Well, yeah, we're not going to try to go into it, but only if they ask questions is where I'm coming from, but have it ready in case.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to have just a couple extra slides that I don't need to include
Exactly.
unless asked, but
Exactly.
if asked and it comes up, I can certainly bounce over
I like
those.
to prepare
and-
for questions
Yeah, I
after
think that's a great idea.
After the presentation.
So just so I understand, so don't have it with the packet materials? The
No, that
actual
too,
visuals?
but just having some extra slides in addition to these, just in case, just to make it easier rather than bouncing between documents and things like that.
And if you send slides
So-
ahead of time, you stop at the questions, you don't include the
That's
last couple.
very good
Yeah.
point, Lisa. Very good.
Some people do, I always look for more.
What?
I always look for additional ones.
Oh, they get it electronically, or they get the
Uh-huh.
packet? Yeah, we're just saying that in the packet,
Mhm.
for the presentation, stop at questions. Don't put the last couple slides in, those are just as backup.
Mhm. I understand.
He was just
It didn't
making,
look like you did, sorry, I didn't mean to beat it. Just-
well, he was making a joke, Lisa, that he always looks for questions.
Okay.
Because I know you always have them.
I see what you're saying now.
So just to recap on the dates, so if you saw the agenda, I included it in the email that accompanied the agenda attachment. May 22nd is the date, scheduled for both the dinner and the presentation during this, during that board meeting. So rather than spread out over 2 meetings, show up once, get dinner. When I get to choose, I usually pick fajita bar for the dinner. That's my personal favorite, so look forward to that. We'll have a gluten option as well, Michelle.
Oh, it's fine, I don't need that. I mean, for fajitas, it's simple enough, I'll just eat
Well,
salad and.
we're trying to be consistent with every one of the groups to make sure that we have something for
So
everybody.
is everybody getting fajitas since you choose them? I think that seems fair.
Yes.
What time on the 22nd?
5:30.
5:30. Good choice of days, because I already have an
Looks like
appointment,
I'm
which
in
means I
town.
won't be stuck in
Shocking.
Loveland.
Well, good. It would be great to have everybody, here.
Just marked it in. Given that I was ready to come this past Monday.
Yeah, I know, you had emailed me that
It must have been
afternoon.
old, huh?
Maybe.
Some old date, who knows? Several generations back, doubtless. Anybody else, are you really glad when this week's over?
Pretty excited.
It actually got better at 5 o'clock last night, it got massively better.
Oh, good.
2 huge proposals that I just, you know.
I'm just glad that
All
I've gotten
consuming.
to this week. I'll call that. Is
All right.
Let's take that as a win.
Yes.
So circling back, if we want to maybe go back to the top of the agenda and scoot through a couple of things. The newsletter items, Essie, if you want to bring up the newsletter, or if you want to give me the.
I'll just give you the mouse.
Oh, I don't want that. So I'm going to try and not take as much time. I did a poor job of that last month. So a couple of things to highlight in this month's newsletter, if you haven't had a chance to look through it in detail. This is the kind of the kickoff of our event season. So we have the Arbor Day celebration, and then at the new Wildflower Park this Saturday. Also the location and same time as the Heart to Recycle and Household Hazardous Waste event, this Saturday 9 to noon. We talked last month about who was going to be available to help with that. This is a program that was initiated with the support of this group, and volunteers have supported it consistently since it was approved by the board to fund. So it's been coordinated by our court clerk, because we, as you all know, we don't have any staff associated with anything related to sustainability. You can come? Oh, great.
You can do a shift or something.
So usually what we've done in the past is I'll come, and then the municipal court clerk, and then usually 1 or 2 staff members, also in our department, have come to help in the past, but we've all been so busy. I really want to not have them come
This
in
Saturday.
on this coming Saturday. So
And-
Mike and Caitlin
And
had.
El Dorado K, that's
Right
not
by
the
the
one that's right here, not the one by my house, that's a
No,
different
the other one. The other one further up Indiana.
Okay,
Yep,
thanks.
past the fire station.
Okay, thanks.
So last month we talked a little bit about dates.
Okay, yeah.
Where they have the.
And who could do what?
caucus, Where they have the caucus.
Oh, okay, yeah, perfect. Sorry.
Oh, no,
go
that's
ahead.
okay.
We're just getting it straight.
Yeah, let's figure it out.
No,
I got it
We
now,
don't want
so-
anybody driving around aimlessly on Saturday.
I'll come at the early shift, like 9 o'clock, okay?
Okay, that'd be great. So usually what we try and do, since it's it's 3 hours, right? Yeah, 9 to
And
noon.
I'll bring a bunch of the evaluation surveys too. Or do you already
Those
have
tick
them?
sheets I already have.
Fine.
I updated them.
Okay.
And I took off the reader board and updated the date. There was
I
one,
can
and then
be
we
there.
didn't have one last year, so I took off last year. You know,
I can be there Saturday too. It's Saturday, right?
it is.
I can do that.
All right, so
We're gonna
that's
be here
awesome. So we've
because
doubled.
there's-
So Mike, are you
Yeah.
still available?
Yes.
Awesome. And then
Sweet.
Caitlin's not here, but we'll assume that she's still available and can go to either.
Is
we
it
talked
gonna
about-
work? If I come early, is that gonna work for you?
I think it's fantastic.
Okay, all right.
If
I
But
mean,
that's just
the
me.
first shift, the
Okay.
boy wasn't
First
already
shift?
committed to
That's
the
okay.
youth.
But
So
9
let's,
o'clock till
we can talk
8.
about dates, or talk
9
about
to
times.
something.
Let's talk about times. So we got 2 things going on, both start at 9. So we can
Oh.
have
2 things.
either Mike or Caitlin had initially said that you would be interested in maybe splitting time between being at the Household Hazardous Waste Hard to Recycle event and then also walk across the park to the Arbor Day event and man a booth there. The box that I had
I see.
referred to last month is back there with the handy dandy Post-it that says RCAC on it. I went through some of the material and through some of the stuff that was kind of dog-eared and a little beat up, but there's a lot of good information in there that we've collected over the years. So the group had talked about taking the box and sorting through it, and I added 50, maybe 100 of the recycling tips. So for the folks who aren't familiar with what they can put in their recycling can, which is one of those questions I get often enough that it makes sense it's very prominently on our website, and it's just one of those questions that if we're going to have an opportunity to talk about sustainability, include that. And then also a flyer about the Household Hazardous Materials facility that Boulder County runs is also in there. So if there's some folks at Arbor Day who wonder what the heck's going on over at the school, well, there's an opportunity to head home and grab batteries and light bulbs or textiles, anything else that you want to take back, as long as it's done before noon. So it's actually kind of a nice opportunity to have both events at the same place at the same time to have some overlap. So Mike volunteered and Caitlin.
Across
You
the
know,
park,
and
what do you mean across
I
the
just
park?
realized that
There's the
the
new park is in the field, that dozen or so acres that used to be kind of raw.
Lisa, the land
Is that
swap,
part-
you know where the land swap property is.
You mean where the school?
The school
Right
was
next to the
supposed to
school.
be, that's where the park is.
All right, so I can do why don't I do 9 to 10 at the hazardous waste and then 10 to 11 at the other thing?
Awesome,
Right.
that'd be great. So if we want to divide that up, I want to ask Mike and Caitlin first, since they volunteered
Yes.
last month.
So sorry.
What would work for you guys, what would plan, and then Lisa, you can maybe double up on that.
Yeah, so I have planned to be there from 9 to 12, and I'm flexible to split time between the events.
Okay, so why don't you
So-
plan to be at Arbor Day if you want to take the box with you, and if there's something else that you want to be printed out,
Yeah.
email me and I'll print off 50 or 100 of them and bring them with me. So Mike at 9, maybe a little before 9, like 8:45ish.
Yes. Did you say you're going to be there personally, or no?
I will, yeah.
You will, yeah. So you can help. I just wanted to like find the booth space and where that's allocated for RCAC and make sure I know where to be and that kind of thing.
Yep, I understand your question. We're small, we're a small staff, so I'll be there, and then our Parks Rec and Open Space staff will be coordinating the event, and we have an events and volunteer supervisor who is going to be kind of the quarterback for the whole operation over at the park, and that won't be any problem. There'll be booths set up for some vendors, and I think OSAC is also going to have a presence there, and then RCAC will also have a presence. I didn't notice if ProStac would be there.
Okay.
So
Well,
it won't be hard to find.
Should be
It won't be
easy
hard
to
to find.
figure that out. Okay, great.
So if you can get there a little before 9,
Yeah.
and have the materials ready to go, and it's an opportunity to just chat with folks who are there, and then also chat with folks who are also on the committees. Like Essie, you mentioned last month or a couple months ago how beneficial it was at Chili Fest
Mhm.
to chat with folks on the other committees, just
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
see those points of
Hey, real
overlap.
quick, Martin, I just realized in scanning through all the stuff the town's been sending out about the new park, which I hate the name, by the way. There's never been anything in there about, hey, bring your electronics, because it's just next door.
Mhm.
I'm like, how dumb that we hadn't capitalized on that.
Good point.
And
Yeah,
I'm talking about
that's
we.
true.
They're
No,
together.
it's in here, but there's been emails at least once a day coming out from the town about this wildflower park opening,
Mhm.
and there's been nothing about the household hazardous waste going on next door.
And they both come out in
I
e-blasts.
just read one
together.
from today, and there's nothing in there. The e-blasts are different from the messages I'm talking about. I'm talking about like to the message board, you know.
Mhm.
They haven't.
On the message board.
Uh,
Oh,
Park-
CAC?
Thank you. I'm like, that damn name.
Yeah, I haven't looked at
Always
my
gets off
CAC folder in a
I
while.
I just double checked this morning, just now. I'm like, oh, did any of the 2 messages that came out today have anything about household hazardous waste going on next door? No.
No, well, it would have been in the e-blast, and we sent those out on the schedule that Melissa and I coordinate on.
Yeah, I'll try to
for
follow up with
months.
it personally, but yeah, it's just, there's other people from the town sending it out, and you have 2 events going on next to each other, yet they're only advertising 1. That's what I'm just
Well,
trying to say.
Gosh.
Yeah, I understand your point.
For future, we'll have to try to catch that, because, you know, you don't have enough going on.
I guess I'm trying to parse the difference between the bulletin board messages that staff doesn't have anything to do with, and then the
Mhm.
e-blasts that come out, and both events have been prominently
Yeah.
e-blasted, enough to the point where I've gotten some requests to stop e-blasting them. So-
I'll send out a reminder as a person for
Oh,
the
okay.
other one.
Yeah, on the CAC?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could do that, that would be great. Do you have both of the e-blasts? You maybe just merge them?
Yep. I'll just skip the other ones because they all got reminders today.
Okay, that would be great.
I'll just promote ours. While you're there, come by El Dorado.
All right, so Mike at 8:45 at the park, and then Lisa, maybe 8:45-ish,
You bet.
and then you can help with me. I'll be over there with the tick sheets.
And I'll come to household hazardous waste.
And then what time, Michelle?
I'll come at 8:45.
Awesome. Well, if you guys are all going to be there, I'm not coming. So Michelle, maybe 8:45-ish. Usually, like you guys know, like Michelle and Lisa, you both know, sometimes being there for 3 hours can be a little bit of a drain. Sometimes
It
coming,
is.
maybe relieving Lisa at 10:30-ish, if there aren't additional volunteers would make sense, and maybe whoever's
I'll just
at
come
doing the
and,
tick sheets can go over
yeah.
and relieve Mike for a little bit, just to try and spice it up and move
Yep.
folks around a little bit. But we
Yep.
can coordinate that morning. All right, so back to the newsletter. I get quickly sidetracked. Community open house, April 26th, 6 o'clock in this room. I'll set the room up with the tables around the circle like y'all have seen in the past. Lisa, you mentioned you might be available that night,
Which night?
April 26th. I had in my notes from last month that you indicated you might be available.
Oh, I suspect that's true.
This is the advisory committee open house.
Thank you, right.
So
May 26th?
April 26th.
April 26th.
Thank you.
So we have these in the fall and the spring. We had a couple where we only had like 1 or 2 or 3 people, citizens come by and talk, and last time.
April 26th?
Uh-huh.
No, I'm in New Orleans.
Oh, perhaps I misheard you last month.
Yeah.
That's my mistake.
I may have thought you said May or something, I'm an idiot. Yeah, I have to go to New Orleans like 1 day, or 2 days, stay away a week, go back another couple days.
That happens. That's why we do this over a couple of months.
Thank you.
To make sure make sure everybody's schedules is straight.
Sorry, other school meetings.
It means I'm gonna miss the art, yeah, I have another meeting too, yeah, miss another meeting.
So, like I was mentioning, sometimes there's nobody, and sometimes, like last October, I think there were a dozen people here, but only 1 or 2 of the committees were represented, and I ended up staying here and talking to a dozen people for a while about different committees. Mike, you were at that, right? Was that the first time I met you?
No.
Maybe it was
I
before
came to
that.
one of these.
Oh, you came to one of these.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, they all blur together.
Yeah.
We're just glad that people are interested and show up. So I'll put a reminder note with
Yeah.
the meeting notes and see if somebody might be available. Transit updates we've had in the past. The Call and Ride service now has an FAQ section, if you haven't had a chance to click on this link, the Public Works Director and I met with the folks who run the call and ride operation for RTV and put together an FAQ list, which is some great information for folks who are not familiar with the call and ride service or how it works or how to pursue or follow up on any questions they might have. HOV3 and then the bus route information that we've had in past meeting or past newsletters is included. And
With the
one
call and
more
ride
item.
service.
Oh, garage
phone
sale.
number, my phone.
Oh, nice.
But, you know, I might need some time in that week. Who knows where it'll be?
That's a good idea.
I didn't include this on the calendar items or mention it previously, but it was one of the items we had in the newsletter. Every spring we have a community garage sale that the town co-sponsors with Karen Geiger of Caldwell Banker Real Estate. This is an opportunity for folks to shed stuff without it going to landfill, which has always been a great item or a great policy recommendation from this group in years past to help promote the community garage sale. Pool stuff, Historic Commission, they have their program on Thursday the 20th. Maybe that's what I was thinking of the date. And then CRC, or Center for Resource Conservation, starting up the sprinkler irrigation audits for the spring. Commuting Solution is promoting their spring Bike to Work effort and initiative, and then some of our ongoing reminders about the yard waste service and high wind warning for trash day, bulk item discard options, and then the do good information. So there you go, newsletter items that we've talked about in the past, a couple of updates, and got caught up on a couple of the items for this group on schedule for the events. Whew. All right. Oh look, we got through most of this. There you go. So newsletter items, we covered the calendar items. So logistics for this Saturday for the Household Hazardous Waste and Arbor Day event, and then the committee open house, and then
For
the
the,
joint session at 5:30.
For the informational materials, I'll plan to take what's in the box and look through it
Thanks, Mike.
and bring that with me in person. But I'll just take liberties to see if there's anything that's not already printed out in the box that I think is relevant to our committee that would be good to share with residents and.
Sure, yeah, send it to me or
Okay.
send a link to it and I'll print it off.
Okay. Great,
And try to bring it Saturday.
Yeah, not knowing what's in the box, I don't know what.
It is a mystery.
But you know, there's other.
I know. I left it way over there, so
Excel
it's.
programs or other water conservation, like the town offers rebates for water conservation appliances or whatever they are.
Toilets.
Right, like I don't know if that's represented in the.
It might be.
In the
We had
box
put
or not. I think
together
it's
a
in
flyer.
there.
Is that one that we put together still in there?
It is the one that
Okay.
you and I worked on a couple of summers ago.
So there
There's a
should
big
be a
stack
lot
of
of
those in
stuff
there,
in there,
Okay.
so
and it has
That
that
should
was
cover a lot
Michelle
of
tried to capture, I think, a kind of a spectrum of programs
Okay.
that the
Well, you'll
community's been involved
see, if you see that one and you think there's stuff missing, let me know, because I still have the original, you know what I mean, so I can quickly edit it.
Great. And then the only other thing, recognizing we have a vacancy and some people will wander by the little booth, if we have like a recruiting.
There actually is a flyer in there that Michelle worked on one, and then Melissa on our staff worked on one too, and there's a stack in there specifically
Okay.
I can
referencing
remember
that.
what I've done,
Cool.
it's been so long.
Well, it's such a mystery. I could just walk all the way
Great.
over and get it. But now let's let it be a mystery. You have to come Saturday if you
exciting
want
Let
to
it
see
be a
it.
mystery. Let it be a
Yeah.
mystery. It's
Come
right
Saturday
there.
and
like,
see
no
it.
one knows.
I don't
There's
mind being on
actually nothing in the
my
box.
feet all the
Okay.
whole time, so, you know, I'll just wander around where you guys think we need them.
Cool.
Cool.
I'll start over that household hazardous waste.
Great.
Seeing if I can find anything in my car. Seeing I've already made 2 trips to there recently, so probably not.
So some additional materials, Mike, I think we can try and print those out. Advisory committee open house, we'll have a reminder for anybody who might be interested or available to go. Joint session with the board, we talked about what was going to be presented when, so May 22nd at 5:30. And then next, well, we can talk, so I had a note here, and I'm glad I did because I was going to space it. So developing the topics list. So the dinner beforehand, you know, for an hour or so, this group gets together and just has a dinner and just can chat about whatever you'd like with the board. So we've had topics lists in the past. We've gone from the work plan. Last year we had a program list that Lisa had compiled. So it's it's whatever you want to use to start the conversation. It might be an opportunity to talk a little bit about the presentation that the board's going to hear later, and maybe expedite or have some opportunities there. So
Okay.
that's a reminder we can talk about now or talk about next month. We'll have the May meeting to talk about it. And then I had a reminder here to mention the 2018 budget schedule. Now we're working on budget all year long, as like a lot of public entities, but the submitted the budget review committee for the town manager and finance department staff begin their review in June. So we have a couple of months to finalize the budget recommendations for 2018, just like all the other years. We do everything by June to try and finalize. So just a calendar item to note.
Too bad you guys can't switch to biennial budget, huh?
Yeah. That would be nice. That would be nice. I'm going to try and not daydream. So those were the calendar and newsletter items, I see. And then you'd started the presentation on going over the updated presentation. And then and you all had received with the agenda a memo from Sharon outlining some of the long-term options. So this group last month talked about refining the short-term ask, and then including with that a request from the board for direction on proposing or a potential recommendation to bring back as a long-term request to have a code change or some larger policy direction on this. So Sharon's here. Thank you, Sharon, for coming tonight. She has a presentation she can go over.
Just to close the loop on this, what's our plan on the topics list for the board? Is it to defer that to our next meeting for discussion? And to try to think of ideas between now and then?
I think that might be good to have a designated time to talk about it at the next session to make sure that we have figured out what we want to discuss with them.
Or just email the group if you have a brainstorm, or email them
At least
Dusty
it
or
won't
me.
be
That's true.
dog poo like it was 2 years ago.
Oh, dog poo's going to come back up.
That was
Especially
our
over
main
dinner.
topic at that dinner.
I think it's come up at a couple of other committee meetings. I can't imagine this would be different.
It was great, because that was the main time that we chose to present the whole
Mhm.
dog poo recycling thing. It was awesome.
Thanks.
Well, the dog waste compost program.
Yeah, we did
from
that
2
at
years
our
ago. I mean,
dinner.
you guys were just way ahead. You know, OSAC caught up. Oh, I didn't mention the OSAC cleanup day. See, so I skipped the
Yeah,
garage sale and then also the OSAC cleanup day. That is Saturday the 22nd.
Yeah, actual
I
Earth
think
Day.
that's
Okay.
right. Yeah, that's right. It's on Earth Day.
All right. You guys ready for some
Go.
extra info for your brains on this fabulous Thursday? So I don't know how many of you guys got a chance to look at the memo that got sent out that I included, but it's really there just to help you guys, since your long-term ask of the committee, of the board rather, is to look at different code revisions. So I thought giving you guys a little bit additional background on codes and who's implementing codes and what considerations to think about would just give you a little bit of food for thought to chew on, and to maybe help you refine what you want to ask the board, rather than keeping it so nebulous that it's like, do you want us to look at this? Yes. Okay, now what do we do? So giving you guys a little bit more direction or at least creating more questions, which is potentially helpful. So these are just some high level. So do you have a
No,
question?
just asking a question.
Oh, so the big issue is there's a bunch of different types of codes to consider. So 3 main ones. You've got Energy Code, which is the IECC. Right now, Superior is on 2012. Boulder is on 2015. But actually, for towns of our size, I think Golden might be the only one in the 10 to 25,000 population range, and maybe one other town is using 2015. So just as a point of comparison. But you've got energy codes, which the goal is to create the most efficient building, and you've got new construction as the focus for that kind of code. And it's always reviewed during the planning and construction phase. Similarly, the Green Building Code is aiming to make the most sustainable building in new construction. Energy efficiency is really their selling point. So what's interesting about IGCC is when they try to justify their costs of implementing, they point a lot to IECC and the savings that comes from energy. So, in my opinion, just from all the reading that I did, I will say that I think the Green Building Code column, it's definitely more of an ancillary code, but it's a consideration. It's something you could amend or create.
But it's
Even-
interesting because nobody, like in the town list that you sent,
Yeah,
is using
very
it.
few, very few. Even Boulder doesn't really have a green IGCC for commercial. They have this, it's really focused on energy.
Are there
Um,
any real significant benefits over just the IECC comparatively? Okay. That's kind of my impression, but I was curious.
Yeah,
So it
I mean,
makes
I did a
sense why
lot
they
of
did it.
reading on it, and I looked through it, and I think they're trying to give a mandatory version of LEAD, LEAD being a voluntary program, and IGCC is trying to be the code-implemented version of a LEAD program. But really, they get most of their savings and benefit from energy, and so really,
Everything the IECC is doing.
yeah, the
like,
IECC is
really.
a better
Yeah.
option. The other piece of this is benchmarking and building performance, which is the other code that Boulder recently enacted, and that's kind of full circle to where I started a year ago when I first came in, was talking about that program, which I helped them set up. And that goal is to support long-term energy and water savings potential. You can do both. And it's for post-construction, old or new buildings. So your building stock that can actually utilize this code is far greater. And it's reviewed and enforced annually. So it's more of an ongoing program to actual achieve of energy savings and document energy savings. So those are your three kind of ordinance types you can explore and potentially take to the town board for questions.
Sharon, before you
Yeah.
move on, if you could go back to the previous slide, so we had started the discussion with Boulder,
Mhm.
and what Boulder has done recently is to adopt a completely separate
Yes.
code, and which one is it most analogous to?
So Boulder's revised energy code. Right now, Boulder was using, until this most recent pass, it was a IECC 2015 with a 30% or higher metric. And now they've revised that code for commercial and residential to be, quote, more streamlined.
So the customized version of IECC?
It's a completely customized version of an energy code. It's no longer, well, I shouldn't say it's no longer linked to IECC. They're using IECC in some areas, but the conclusion that I came to from reading all the documentation and their stakeholder meetings over the past 2 years is that they determined the process of actually reviewing and approving and enforcing a 30% or higher is actually really nebulous and confusing. And they want to try to make it easier on the developer because it was becoming a challenge and too burdensome. So they've just recently passed it.
Okay, so but they're still using the standard building code. They haven't adopted an ancillary or a separate green building code.
No, they don't have the IGCC for commercial specifically, which is really all we're looking at is commercial.
And then they do use benchmarking. So
And they
it's-
do use benchmarking. And I think that they're looking towards long-term, the benchmarking and the energy codes being kind of, they should feed each other. You should be able to demonstrate success of your energy code with benchmarking more. But there's not a lot of data out there to show the energy code savings from implementing an energy code. As I think Essie pointed out, the 5% number is what you can expect in savings for all the effort.
For the benchmarking efforts that Boulder and other groups are doing, is there any data on how much
Savings.
time or effort goes into enforcing that?
That's
Or
I'm
whether
gonna
we,
get
okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's in here. And there is some times there, and then also, we use the EPA portfolio manager estimate of 7% savings, I think they say,
Okay.
for when you benchmark, you're likely to save 7% annually on your building. Oops, I'm using my computer, but I'm here. Okay, so implementation. This is just kind of covering some of the high-level stuff that was in the memo, and I'll walk through it a little bit. And if you have questions, please, this is a good time to ask me. Building and green building code and energy code, kind of, a lot of these are linked because they both run through the building department and are done kind of in a similar way. But things you have to think about when implementing an ordinance change is adopting the code, getting a budget increase for added staff, implementation of that code, training staff, making sure there's compliance and enforcement, and knowing how to identify all the elements of those different steps so that for a town of superior size, you can actually carry it out and carry it out with effective costs. And make sure that you have access to funds, which at this time we know is not funded. Benchmarking, same kinds of considerations, except there's a lot more stakeholder engagement up front because you're trying to get existing companies and buildings on board. who are residing in the city already. It's not like putting rules on a developer who hasn't come to town yet, for example. And all the other same considerations. The other piece of benchmarking is you need data management, because you're getting information in from all the buildings annually. So you need somebody in the city, in the town, who can actually review that data and figure out what to do with it, because the goal is to make the information public, typically. Not every town does it, or the city does it that way, but that's generally the goal. Phasing and timeline, this is kind of loosely based on Boulder, and this can vary widely depending on council or town committees and boards and how things have to go through the superior process, but we were kind of projecting 4 to 6 months for review and code development, about 6 months to a year to budget, because you have to allocate staff time to be able to do these tasks. If you don't have staff, you guys as a volunteer board can't really help with the code implementation. And then you need ongoing review and enforcement and reporting, which is going to be continual. And similarly with benchmarking, it took about 4 to 6 months to go through the stakeholder process. 6 months to a year of initial training and data collection, but it was also the one thing that I didn't fit in this column because I just ran out of space. It took them a full year to go through the process of actually going through the readings to council to get the ordinance passed once they did stakeholder engagement. So just keeping in mind that the timeline for this requires that governmental process. Budget, we're estimating probably for Superior would be about $50,000 for staff if you just did energy code. And if you did IGCC combined, it'd be another, it'd be $100,000. And that's training, equipment, materials. It's probably a subcontract because it's not likely they'll get an in-staff person full-time, because you guys only have, and this is really important to consider, about 20 upcoming large-scale commercial buildings that would even fit to this criteria that we expect to come down the pipeline between now and maybe 10 years from now.
8 or 10 years. So yeah, the completion of the build-out of the town center with the buildings there, and then some of the remaining buildings that could potentially be built in other locations if the Resolute property builds with a commercial or a hotel, in the neighborhood of 20. So if, I think for the budget estimate, Sharon and I discussed if there was an active, at least one or more active commercial applications, and we needed to have somebody or a contractor available to go through the application review and enforcement aspects of this, that IECC would be a little less, and having the building code would be a little bit more. I guess would be the long and short of it.
Right. And any questions?
Is it accurate that Superior currently enforces IECC from a prior year, 2012? Is that what I heard?
Yes.
That is the current code. So when they do the development review process, things must meet that code.
And what's the, maybe you could characterize the difference in going from 2012 to 2015?
Well, I think that's the complicated piece, is we have to get staff up to speed. Like even just me trying to high-level review both codes, there's a lot of data out there. But to really make it effective, you have to have someone who knows the differences and knows what to look for, learn, train, and be available. And
some of that's a kind of a WAG to combine with some outreach and some additional just helping builders understand what the expectation is going to be here, because it's just going to be more.
well,
But weren't
For
you
the
just
folks who are
asking
gonna
though,
be building here?
what is the difference?
Is there one
Yeah.
developer?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
the
each
hypothesis
of the
here
pad
seems
sites
to
is
be
still
that going from
individuals.
2012 to
We have
2015 is
contractors.
stricter and will make buildings more efficient and
Yeah, so you can give
return
us some.
greater sustainability benefit.
But we don't
so
have.
a few examples.
But we
I
would
think
want to
Right.
understand what
If
the
that's-
What the
actual
difference
difference
is.
is.
There's, I can send out some of the documented
That would be
comparisons
great.
that are out there from AIA. The Architectural
But
Institute
if it's something less than
has
building code,
some
it's a
examples.
combination of energy code,
There are incremental changes, like we were talking, Essie and I beforehand. Some of the changes between code years can be very significant, and sometimes they're very small. But it doesn't matter whether the changes are small or significant. You still have to get someone on board who can understand it and educate people about it. And the other piece is to do a lot of the verification now with the newer code, like Boulder uses ComCheck, so there's software to be purchased. And whether you have 20 buildings or 200, software costs the same. So there's other cost considerations to think about with doing proper verification with the newer technology or the newer standard.
Would that ComCheck or specialized software be necessary for both IECC and then And IGCC?
Well, IGCC is much more vague. I mean, I don't even know what you would need to implement for IGCC because it requires certification of building materials that are recycled and a lot of other things that I just feel like you're talking about a huge amount of front-loaded effort to get staff familiar.
So
And
potentially some upfront costs that could
Upfront
taper
costs,
off.
yeah.
Depending on if there are applications. And then just the building industry itself having more than, I guess if there aren't any other jurisdictions that are around the updated code, it's not the norm in the building industry.
Well, and I think it's more that the buildings need to be told the scope of what they're doing by the town, and it has to be institutionalized in a clear way. And
But
I don't know that, frankly, I've seen a lot of clarity in anything I reviewed.
But we're fortunate in some ways that Boulder has adopted 2015 because
They adopted 2015 with a 30% or higher requirement, but it's complicated. Like,
No,
to
but
get a
it's-
staff person to do that here would require either getting a consultant on loan who knows that.
No, absolutely. I was just saying, in some ways, it's to our advantage, even if we don't do it, because there'll be people coming to this area may be prepared
They
to
may be
build the
familiar
Boulder
with it.
standards.
True. There
Which is
may
the
be
permit.
buildings already
And that might be
building.
the reason they come here.
And it could be the reason they come here. And it is true that Boulder is a population of 100,000 people, and they have probably 1,500 to 2,000 buildings existing. And they probably are aiming for another 300 to 400 new commercial buildings, maybe. I don't know exactly.
Maybe we can
but-
just contract with them.
Yeah, contract with Boulder and do all our work. So the big point, though, is you're looking at different scales. Boulder is doing it, but Boulder is a very different type of city than the town of Superior. And then the other thing to point out, you're talking about maybe 20 buildings total over the 10-year scope of Superior's build-out. Boulder probably gets 50 applications, 60, 70 annually. So it's a very different volume.
Mhm.
And Boulder's budget, just to put in perspective, is about $6 million total for the building department, and they probably have at least a couple staff devoted specifically to reviewing and approving the energy piece and working with contractors to make sure that they're up to date.
I have a
So,
quick question regarding the cost in updating IECC. So anytime any town or municipality wanted to do that, that's a cost.
it's a cost.
That's insane.
It is. And I think you have to weigh the pros and cons. How much savings are you getting? What's the goal? Are you trying to attract businesses because your neighbors are already at that level and now you look behind? Are you trying to be the forerunner that looks ahead? Do you have someone who's just incredibly passionate about energy and you want to go for it? Is there extra budget for some reason? Do you have a greenhouse gas goal, which Superior doesn't either? I mean, there's a lot of pieces that come into play. Boulder's aggressive because they're trying to get to net zero energy use by 2030, I want to say. They keep pushing a little bit. But, I mean, that's a pretty aggressive goal, and to do that, they have to do the highest, most stringent code they can find.
That's one of the reasons I think that you see the stagger between when a code is first created and then the the learning curve for the folks that are in the industry to be able to effectively enforce it. So it's usually
It's like a 3-year.
kind of a couple-year window between when it's first generated by the code council and then when it gets adopted.
Yep.
I'm guessing that's one of the reasons.
And then I just want to point out that there's some good data sites that just kind of show high level major cities that are implementing it. And there's a bunch of cities, with the exception of small ski towns, when I was looking through this huge list of cities that implemented the latest code, I came up with about 22 nationwide. Most of them are greater than 100,000 or 60,000 as a population. IGCC, it's even less. And again, usually if you're adopting IGCC, you're Seattle, you're San Francisco, you're New York. Benchmarking, there's a lot of cities doing it, and in, again, the greater than 100,000 range because they have the building stock to justify wanting to collect the data. So they have about 26 cities nationwide. So that just gives you a picture. And then just to point out, there's about 45 existing buildings we came up with right now that could benefit from benchmarking, and then you'd add, the 20 new buildings potentially. So you're talking.
That's the long-term number.
Long-term number is about 65. To point out, Boulder, when we started the program for buildings greater than 50,000 square feet, which would make this smaller, they have 167, I think, 160 buildings. So
it's
again.
So we have about 25 now, so the additional
Yep.
20 would put us at the.
Sorry,
That's the
45 is the
long-term number,
total.
is 45.
So 45 is the
Okay.
total.
How much is it to, because did you cover that? How much is it to implement something like benchmarking then?
It's about, it would still cost about $50,000 because you need a staff person.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Yeah,
Okay.
so-
And that's the ongoing outreach with existing
Existing building
buildings?
owners, and you're running meetings, you're doing outreach, you need a data collection person who potentially serves as the code enforcement piece as well, because there's fines associated with the benchmarking code. If you don't report, there's a fine or a fee. And so,
Unless it's voluntary.
unless you do voluntary, but then there's no cost, and there's
And then
no
you said the voluntary compliance is next to 0, I think.
Voluntary compliance, unless you have like a really passionate group of businesses or buildings, is pretty low.
So unless you have to do it, you don't do it.
You don't really do it unless you have to, or it's the norm in your community, in your area. Mandatory benchmarking is kind of the new trend. They're doing that because I think people have realized that it's hard to demonstrate for greenhouse gas goals that your energy code is actually meeting your climate goal, because there's no documentation to show the savings. So these are just pros and cons and food for thought.
Have you seen any data about relative savings between IECC 2015 versus 2012, or is that still sort of nebulous?
It's pretty nebulous. I tried really hard to read a whole bunch of different reports from different organizations, and I feel like you can get a whole bunch of different answers depending on who you ask and what their assumptions are. I didn't feel like I saw a number that I'd feel comfortable quoting. That's why it's not in the presentation. It just didn't seem like there's a lot of benefits, which we'll get into next. I'll jump here. This is the kind of textbook reason why you would do one of these codes. Is the goal, probably one of the ones that I think is the bigger one, is to help overcome market barriers like split incentives between an owner and a tenant, because that when they might not build a building to a high standard that's efficient, it gives the tenant a benefit and the owner, it kind of forces the owner to do it. So the tenants save in the long run. It can reduce pollution and improve grid reliability if buildings are designed to high standards. Again, the incremental difference between 2012 and 2015, I can't tell you how much more. It does increase potentially the property value, is a big argument that IGCC makes. Quality and comfort arguments are also a big deal. And then making it cost effective in the long run, because I think there's a quality piece that they think if you're putting this much effort into it, you're going to get more quality designers and builders to build. And then improving long-term sustainability. They always point out the numbers that buildings use 40% of our energy and 70% of our electricity, and they emit 1/3 of our greenhouse gases. So why not make them more efficient? There should be projected energy savings if the buildings behave well. Now, my caveat is behave well. You can build it, but it can still be run poorly, which is where I think that's why you're seeing these benchmarking codes popping up now. I used to be the greenhouse gas program administrator for the city of Denver, and there's a big push to document that savings to show that you're meeting the goals. If you can't document it because it's too nebulous, you move on to the next code. And you don't want to pass codes you don't need if you don't have to, I guess is the big point. Benefits of benchmarking, I kind of just jumped into this, but the idea is you're monitoring trends and anomalies over time. So you might actually catch problems with new buildings, old buildings. It's a catch-all for all buildings. And you're able to compare the performance to similar buildings both here and in the rest of the region. So since Boulder is doing a benchmarking program, if you did one, you'd be able to show how your buildings perform as new buildings compared to theirs. Maybe the data would be good, maybe it would be bad. That's the scary part, is you don't know. But it'd be really interesting if Superior's buildings were performing really well because you had a great benchmarking program, but Boulder has this amazing code and their buildings don't perform as well. And you wouldn't have to spend as much money on it. And you track actual savings, and you're educating people on proper behavior with using energy. You can also use this for water in addition to energy. Most of the benchmarking codes focus on energy, though. Water is just a little bit more complicated. But EPA's Portfolio Manager, which tracks this, is kind of the national standard, and it's free, and it can track energy and water. So that is benchmarking code benefits. Some of the challenges to both. There is an increased cost, And you have to think about the fact that there's plan review and inspections that need to be accounted for and staff availability. Right now, they're reviewing with the Development Review Committee, several different topics and aspects, and this would be an added layer to train staff to catch. Otherwise, it serves no benefit if it gets missed in the process. And they need to understand the code language and construction techniques and technologies, get everybody up to speed. There is potentially, to offset the cost to the town, an increased cost to the developer. So there'd probably have to be a fee increase to justify amending the code, or doing an ordinance amendment. And I mentioned this before, but IGCC really seems to rely on energy savings to justify the cost of their whole program. And so what's the point if you're just pointing to energy, just do an energy code? And it doesn't include verification with the energy or the IGCC codes of any ongoing savings or benefit. It's just on paper building, quote, sustainably. But there's no documentation of what that really looks like in the end. There's no data. Benchmarking, some of the challenges. They found that building inventories, and of course with only 20 to 45 buildings, maybe the challenge would be less, but it's a little more complicated than anyone has ever thought of to just try to identify who participates and why and when, and using tax data and assessor data. Timelines, almost every single benchmarking code took longer than everyone anticipated just because of the process and training and rules and systems that had to be followed. And data access, because you're getting electricity, gas, steam, potentially all your energy data. Depending on how complicated your energy system, it could be very complex. And putting it into the system and making sure that people do it regularly and correctly. So having someone verify data, like Chicago actually has an architect or an engineer that actually has to certify the data that's submitted, adds a whole nother layer and cost. So that's one of the challenges. So this is a blank table, and I included it in the memo as well. And the idea was, I can't really score this for you guys because I think you guys as a committee really should discuss or work on your own and then re-come back together maybe at the next meeting, or discuss now, kind of depending on time. I don't know what time it is. What's feasible to do in the town, and then what would you want to ask the town board for direction with? Do you want to get direction to look at all of these in more depth than this? Do you want to pick one to focus on? Do you want to try going a different direction? So I have the 3 here, and then we added another one, which I called the simple path. One of the things that Boulder did do when they updated their latest code is they added a prescriptive path where, in addition to following 2015 code, they added making all buildings EV and solar ready if they're lodging or office space. And I think the idea was it's a really quick and dirty, simple way to make sure that you're getting some really key energy savings potentially, or benefit, out of the building without a whole lot of complicated process. So it's one of the big highlights that popped up in a lot of Boulder's presentations. It doesn't get down into the noise of the complications of a code amendment, but you could take something like that and institutionalize it into the development review process, kind of like the voluntary checklist that we're doing, except we could potentially make this mandatory for new buildings. Martin?
Sure, would be a great way to shorthand it.
Yeah.
If somebody's coming in with a potential application and knows that rather than go through measures and pick one out, that they've had something specific.
So doing a code amendment that says, in addition to all our other code, our IECC 2012 right now, which is what you're on, you could say we're going to be solar ready and have EV in all new buildings effective whatever date. You don't have to have the extra review because it's just a checkbox that it's been done. So from a cost effectiveness standpoint, it might score higher in one area and lower in another area. And I meant to take this one off. I think I took it out of the memo. I just forgot to take it out of my presentation because that's not necessary. But really, you want to score it on access to budget and everything down, like 0 to 4. I feel like everyone on their own should kind of come up with, what do you think the feasibility is? How do you feel about it? And then discuss it as a group. Or we could do it now. I don't know what time we're looking at, so let me.
So 6:30 on the dot, perfect.
Yep. Hey, look at me.
Way to go.
So that's the
so
scoring
the
table.
difference between the memo is that 4th column, that simple path column?
Yeah. Oop. I'm jumping all over. Yes. Oop. Sorry, guys. Can I make you all dizzy?
So I guess.
Yes.
So if we put that table, maybe we can just send that table to the group.
I will. I'll email the table in an
And
email,
then-
and then you guys can kind of just tinker.
Sure. And then maybe come back next month with.
Well, it is in her memorandum.
Except not the fourth.
I didn't add the fourth column.
Oh, the fourth column.
Yeah, the fourth column was
Sorry, I
something
can't
Martin
read
and
that,
I.
so I'm like-
We were.
Yeah.
With the white
So we were,
headings, I can't
we were
read.
brainstorming right before the meeting. And
Yeah.
What does
Sharon
it
is
say?
so smart and quick. She added this right before the.
She's a rock star.
So
Ah.
it's a
What does
simple
it say?
path that requires solar and EV ready lead or other voluntary certifications in the development review
You just
process.
have that as
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
baseline. Everybody has to do it requirement rather
think
than
that
having
sounds
an
great.
ongoing.
Mhm.
So there, it just gives you another option, because I guess as I went through the feasibility myself, I'm looking at the scope and size of other towns, other communities, what's feasible. There's going to be things that score high in each column, and there's going to be things that score really low. And then you got to kind of do for no go, and whether you want to pursue it. You should pick the one that obviously sums to the highest score. And I wanted to add that simple path one because it seemed like the biggest change in Boulder's commercial specifically was this prescriptive path being clearer, because people were just, it was confusing. And so those highlighted items would be very easy to add without really having to dive into the depths of the code, and could reap a long-term benefit for buildings right away without necessarily having it be voluntary like the list that you guys put together.
Mhm.
So,
And it might make sense, I guess, so those were the couple of feasibility questions that Sharon and I just kind of brainstormed over the phone. So
Mhm.
timeline and budget, staffing, benefits, and then challenges. There might be
Mhm.
some other variables that would make sense to add to a feasibility
yep.
matrix.
Impact.
Mhm.
Impact.
Oh, yeah, impact.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's benefits, so.
Well, yeah, I mean,
like,
I
there's
didn't
a lot
put.
of benefits.
Yeah, I
It might
didn't.
make sense to have some subcategories under benefit and challenge. Maybe
Right.
individually score them.
You might want to break them out into pieces, some of the benefits, and I could do that.
The other one's always case studies or other places, so you have the count, which is good. But
Have the.
count, which is good, of number of
Mhm.
communities, maybe a couple
Local.
a couple nearby ones or something like that, or.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
yeah, maybe like
Name
local
case.
reference or
Yes.
local analogies.
Yes, and there's some reports that have come out, like, Boulder's one of them, and there's others that are using the code, but using the code and actually running like a large energy program are very different, because I think a lot of towns just say, okay, we're using the latest code. And then it's just a question of like, well, did you do the things in the code? Cool. When you add the layer that Boulder's adding, there's a whole nother level of like political will and complication.
Does anybody know off the top of their head if the benchmarking that Boulder and some of the other bigger jurisdictions are doing, if there are any other, is anybody else in this area using benchmarking?
Denver just started their program. They just got approval through an ordinance, I think, last winter in 2016. So Denver's doing it, Boulder.
Anybody between Denver and Boulder?
Not small towns, but, and I should say Fort Collins does use the IGCC, but they did a modified version where it's almost custom, kind of like Boulder did a modified version of Energy. But they're doing benchmarking, but they had a voluntary program in Fort Collins. So, small towns, really less than 100,000 are not jumping in yet.
Is it because benchmarking is hard or different, or it's
Building stock. I mean, it's almost like if you only have 15 or 20 buildings, I could call them tomorrow and help them. It's like, how much time does it take to get 20 to 30
Way
buildings?
in one way, like, do you need to go this far because there's not that many, but you still want to?
Do you need a draconian, like authoritarian way to tell them what to do? Or if it's small enough, can you find, I think
or
when
in a
it's.
newer community, like majority of the commercial buildings here versus the age, some of the
Right.
century-old buildings that are in Boulder
Yeah.
have a bigger
Potential savings.
benefit.
Exactly. And I think part of it's size too. It's just implementing a code change for a small number of buildings when you have to start breaking it down by cost per building starts to become a hurdle that you factor
Yeah,
into your feasibility score.
If we're looking at like $2,500 per building estimated just to get, unknown energy savings, that may not be super huge.
Right. Well, and that's annual cost. So that's not total cost. That's annual.
Oh.
You have to have a
for,
staff.
yeah, for ongoing. So for
That's a good point.
benchmarking, it would be ongoing, but for code, it would be sort of
Initially
at the start.
upfront,
Yeah,
right.
sort of
You're
at
right.
the early-
Okay.
But it
early
could
year.
be an upfront cost of 50 grand with a 50 grand staff on call for
Mhm.
10 years.
Or yeah, whenever there are
building.
several commercial applications,
So
that would be
Mhm.
the additional time.
could be
for
more
the
than
staff or
2,500.
consultant.
Just a morbid question now. So how does it work with commercial buildings right now? Is it the same guy that we share with Broomfield? Like, who does the inspections and enforcement of
Yeah,
that
that's what I was
stuff
curious
right
as
now?
well.
For energy?
For,
Yeah, for any commercial building.
Just for our current
Our
IECC.
building
For our
inspector.
2012
Yeah.
code.
It is the
Yeah.
same guy that we share.
well,
Ernie?
Ernie is the town's chief building official who handles commercial building. We have some other inspectors who work as contractors. They do some home inspections for us.
But Ernie's not full-time for us.
Ernie is on a varying schedule. He is
Right.
a contractor, he's not a staff member.
Okay, because.
He works some weeks he works more than 40 hours, some weeks.
Right,
he
but
works less.
is he the same guy we used to share with Broomfield? It is,
No.
isn't it? Oh. We always shared somebody with Broomfield, so I'm very confused.
I'm not familiar with anybody we share with Broomfield.
Yeah, like
RG
when I came and did building inspection, but that's just residential, it was a guy who did half of his day in Broomfield and half of his day here.
Hmm.
Don't know. One of the folks who does the after hours inspections at home for remodels and.
It was during the
furnaces.
day, but anyways, okay. I thought it was Ernie, but.
So Ernie he's must be trained and familiar with the 2012 IECC code because he's conducting those inspections today.
Hopefully.
And so going to the 2015 code, the major change is that it would require training him.
Training Ernie
On a
and
new
making
code.
sure he can review that and handle, and that it's really it's the education of the building, creating new processes and protocols for developers to be aware of those changes.
Yeah, communicate, well, how familiar are
If you're
developers
just
with the
doing blanket
2015
code, you can point to the code, and most developers should know, but it doesn't mean that you don't need checklists and internal prompts, like I've been working with the permit department on for other things to make sure that you don't lose sight. But I would say, as long as you keep it to the code and you're not trying to do a custom program like Boulder, then the outreach and marketing is probably less,
Yeah.
the training piece. But you do have to train somebody to be up to speed.
Right.
And some of that's the reason for the lag that I mentioned earlier. So the
Mm-hmm.
2012 code was adopted, and then it takes a year or so for everybody in the industry to receive the materials, become indoctrinated, and go through the training required in order to enforce provisions of those codes.
And just when you're getting used to it, they change it again. And I mean, I'll send you the data I have on some of the comparisons of the two and what the biggest differences are. There's a couple good presentations, but they're pretty overly technical, I guess is what I would say. I'll try to find the most simplified version I can find to send out.
Yeah, you sent out a great list. That was a lot.
Yeah, well, I did. Some of the resources that I sent to you guys as attachments in addition to the memo were some of the stakeholder conversations about whether or not to do these codes that happen in other towns. So from, Lisa, your perspective on case studies, that kind of has some of the details that were discussed and how a couple towns framed forming a green code or an energy code. But yeah, I'll send this out as an action item and an updated comparison of 2015 to 2012. And then, yeah, the added consideration for scoring is, would you just want to add some specific measures to be mandated rather than completely jumping into 2015 code as a way to get quicker adoption?
I guess one final question is, if we're going from 2012 to 2015, is there going to be a 2018 code coming out soon, potentially?
Very good question. I don't know, but I'll
Okay.
verify that. I mean, they're always reviewing and trying to improve, and there is a question of, do you leapfrog? Do you
Mhm.
wait for the next one? Or is based on timeline of when your 20 buildings are going to be built?
I mean, yeah, that's certainly the problem is we've got our town center, and that's kind of, after that, I'm not sure how many
Yeah.
other commercial buildings are going to be built.
Well, that's the thing,
So-
and putting an ordinance in place that's only going to be effective for a certain number of years, and then it's like, what's this ordinance for? That's another
Something to
timeline
consider,
question.
yeah.
Mhm.
The schedule, though, for adoption, just for reference, for building code and for the international energy conservation code, is going to be to try and bring them to the board at the end of this year to have everything.
Right. Well, that's what I was just thinking. Like, it wouldn't make sense necessarily to wait until if there is a 2018 IECC, because that would probably take enough time that it probably
I
would be
can't
super
remember the
useful in
stagger
terms
for
of.
IECC. For building codes, it's 4 or 5 years. I
Yeah.
can't remember what it is.
Well, ICCC, that
Yeah.
3-year window was fairly unusual because it was
Okay.
2009 before that. So that's,
I think that's more
Okay.
typical for.
Yeah.
That seemed right,
Gotcha.
because it was 9, 12,
well, there was a
15.
That's
6.
true.
It was 2006, 2009,
So
2003,
energy
6,
6,
9,
and then building is
15.
So actually,
Four or
if it is
five.
going
Alright.
in, but the interesting thing is, by the time it's put out, maybe about the time that we're actually ready to
Built.
pounce.
Mhm.
Well, but then it's a question of because there's going to be a lag time in terms of Ernie and everyone else getting up to speed on what the current code is, and being able to communicate that to the developers. So then it's a question of whether we can get the new code, train everyone, and have it apply in the new buildings in time.
Yeah.
Because
For
if
buildings
it doesn't
to go
apply
in.
to the town center, then there's no real point in,
If your
you know?
goal, if your goal is to get the town center built to a certain standard or to have a certain amount of energy savings or efficiency, you know, that's why the short-term ask is so important. And then
Mhm.
on a long-term consideration, it's just what is the feasibility? Don't put something in place that won't capture more than 5 buildings of your 20.
So
Don't put something in place.
does it make
that
sense
won't
to
work.
include in the short-term ask a recommendation that the updated code, energy conservation code, be adopted as soon as possible?
Yeah, maybe
Fine,
that's
dude.
a better way of framing it in the
Mhm.
presentations rather than short and long term. Have it be like, you know, an immediate
Ask one.
voluntary thing, and then
Ask
also
two.
sudden, yeah, like a smaller picture and bigger picture type stuff.
Mhm.
So, all right.
Mhm. And then that way you guys can explore that over the next year to see if you can actually implement within the next,
Mhm.
before the 2018 comes out.
Adopt that one in 2019.
Yeah. So one last devil's advocate thing for me, because I love playing devil's advocate. There's a couple studies that I came across, Yale, Georgetown, a few different groups. You can find studies pointing to all directions, but I thought this was worth highlighting because one of the things they talked about was that the codes may not reduce energy use as much as they project, in which case they say policymakers should be hesitant to rely on forecasted carbon reductions from energy codes in environmental policy. So if your goal here is carbon emission reduction on its own, an energy code may not give that to you. That's why benchmarking is becoming more the trend. So just something to, again, food for thought. But we're going to end there. Oh, and I did have some comparisons. I'll make sure, I'll send out the presentation. See the little, that's the difference between 2012 and 2015. There you go. I'll send some of this data and the sources. I forgot I had that in there. I love when I forget things. I put extra stuff at the end that seemed too technical, but.
2015 was released at the end of 2014.
That's
Okay,
usual.
so it's possible that the new ICC is going to come out really soon. We should figure out what the release schedule is looking like for the next IECC.
Just
Yeah.
cancel everything, I'm good.
All of it.
Because if we could jump ahead by 2, then that would be worth
Yeah.
considering at least. So.
Then
Yeah.
you'd be way ahead of Boulder. Because
Yeah,
it would take
exactly.
them years to go through their stakeholder process, so.
Yep, we can show them.
Worth exploring.
Yep. Could you also, at some point for reference, just like kind of show what the areas around us are doing in terms of like Broomfield, Boulder, and Louisville?
Yes, I have that too. So
Okay,
that,
cool.
the presentation and the table and the
Cool.
comparisons I'll send out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Just so you know, 2018
Mhm.
proposals and refinements were due at the end of 2015.
Okay, so they ostensibly should be released sometime relatively soon.
Mhm.
Really should.
All right, I'll look into that a little bit more.
Surprisingly enough, yeah. But
Well, yeah, maybe if you start the ask now, to look at 2018, you'll be like ahead of the game.
well, I mean, that's the
Yeah,
thing.
that'd
If
be
you're going to
cool.
spend the money and we're so close to the new one,
Well,
why
and that's
wouldn't
my
you
thing
just
is,
look ahead?
you know, if we could just leapfrog and jump onto that one for the same cost, then that seems like a no-brainer.
At least a more reasonable suggestion.
Yeah.
So the 2018 one, I'm sorry, Michelle, tell me.
According to what I'm seeing, they're released towards the end of the year before, so the
Yes.
2018 should be released at the end of this year.
If there is a 2018.
Oh, there is. There definitely is.
But we,
Cool.
I guess, but in the interim, we would want to have the 2015, right, and then adopt the 2018.
Well, heck,
as-
why would you? Why wouldn't you just skip? Because a lot of towns
Then we-
on that metrics that she showed skipped.
But there'll be some building permits issued between now and then,
Yeah.
most likely.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that's the short-term.
Oh, but they're not even going to consider it till the end of the year.
Well, if we could do
Adopting
like
it.
the simple path as an interim
Sorry.
measure and then
Mm.
jump onto the 2018 IECC,
Yeah.
maybe that's the way to go.
I guess
That'll
what
be
I'm saying is-
Your short-term ask is sooner than the end of the year, right?
Yeah, but you know it's not going to happen. Sorry. I'm trying to bring
Cynicism
back-
emerges.
Full blanket of reality.
Sorry, man. So sorry.
Well, Martin, I need
So
you
to
take off.
maybe synthesize it, so wait until the end of this year and then
I
try
say go
to-
for it, but maybe just say, hey, you know, you should look for this. But the reality is, you know, they're not going to start on anything because it involves spending money, and it's not in the budget for this year, so it has to be budgeted for next year. So if you're going to tell them about anything, you should say, hey, this is what you do, but by the way, 2018 arrives at the end of this year, so look how up to date you'll be.
Mm.
Yeah.
Just adopt as soon as possible.
Yeah.
whatever the
Adopt
updates are.
something.
Exactly, adopt something, but the reality is we
Mhm.
know it's not even gonna be started until they approve money.
Well, that'd be a
Which
good
isn't
topic
till
to
the end of the
discuss
year.
over dinner with
Yeah.
people anyways, just
Oh, that
like,
would be
you
a
know,
really
what
good
would
topic for
be-
the dinner, you're right.
Mhm.
What are you guys even willing to think about and, you know,
Mhm.
timeframes and all that, so.
I mean, I totally agree, like, sooner rather than later by all means, but, you know, the reality
Yeah.
is, yeah, if they're gonna get started training, they're not gonna start till training next year, why would you train on 3-year-old
Mhm.
stuff?
Mhm. Yeah.
So there might be some good context for the dinner.
Mhm. Cool.
Better than dog food.
You know it's gonna come up.
Because you're gonna bring it up, just like you wanna ask
Putting it at the
questions.
top of the list. I might just put it on the board.
This is all great, thank you so much, Sharon.
Yeah, you bet.
Oh,
Yeah,
I get
thanks.
more than I can eat now.
So I need to go, but y'all can stay and talk about anything.
Happy
Anything
to
else
call
on
it
the
a day.
list? No?
Definitely.